Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Panos Moumtzis. I'm with the Senior Transformative Agenda Implementation Team. And today I'm here in New York. The topic we're going to discuss is about the World Humanitarian Summit. And the angle we're trying to see is, as much as we can, what would be the impact for the field? What will be the impact for the humanitarian operations all over the world? I'm delighted to see colleagues from over 57 countries who have joined this conversation. I can see a huge interest from many colleagues who have joined us from Africa, from Asia, from Middle East, really from all over the globe. Before introducing our guest speaker, I would like to say 2 words on the webinar rules. As with previous webinars, you will have on your screen top 3 buttons on the top right-hand side. You can send us questions from the get-go of this webinar from right now by pressing on the Q&A button, and I will be getting these questions and asking them during the second half of the webinar. I would like to ask all colleagues to please remain on mute. If you can please mute yourself and remain on mute throughout the webinar. Thank you. So during the second half of the webinar, we'll be taking questions that you will be sending us from the field locations. In fact, we have already received a couple of questions and would welcome more questions as they come through. I also want to point out that the WebEx platform we're using has a chat box, and really would like to encourage you all to also talk in between yourself, share reflections. This is an interactive two-way communication that we would like to have during this discussion. For any colleagues who may have difficulty on listening to this webinar, which is only on audio, I want to highlight that you have a download through YouTube. And should you have a problem, please do not hesitate to alert us, and you'll get the technical support. The webinar will be recorded and will be available on the website as per usual practice with all webinars we go on the ground. I also want to point out there is an opening poll with a couple of questions. We're basically trying to measure who is online and what's your experience. Please take a minute as we're going through the webinar to talk and to give us your feedback through the poll that is in place. So really, to answer to the questions and to give us his perspective, I'm really honored and delighted that we have with us in today's webinar Under Secretary General, Mr. Stephen O'Brien, Emergency Relief Coordinator. Stephen, really it's a pleasure to have you here, and thank you for making the time and being on this discussion where many colleagues are really online and want to hear your views. The World Humanitarian Summit is taking place, as you all know, in Istanbul on the 23rd and 24th of May, 2016. So we're really just 2 months away from this important gathering that will take place. During the last almost 3 years, there have been extensive consultations with the field. Over 23,000 people were interviewed, were consulted, preparing for the summit. A summit which is really envisioned to set a direction for the broader humanitarian system for many years to come. The basis of the summit is the United Nations Secretary General's report, One Humanity, Shared Responsibility. The report sets an ambitious agenda for humanity, and really where there is over 100 commitments that are grouped under 5 core responsibilities. I'm going to mention them very briefly. Is 1, global leadership to prevent and end conflicts. 2, uphold the norms that safeguard humanity. 3, leave no one behind. 4, change people's lives from delivering aid to ending need. 5, invest in humanity. There have been critical proposals that are actually under discussion as we speak. The Grand Bargain is one of them. There's discussion with donors. There's discussions with humanitarian actors. There is a plan to reduce internal displacement by 50% at least by 2030, reinforcing international humanitarian, human rights, refugee law, addressing relief to development nexus. Really, there is an ambitious agenda. There's an ambitious plan that is put in place, and the summit itself, actually, we have 7 high-level roundtables and many side events that will take place. Of course, the summit itself is setting a new direction, and this is what we will try to discuss today. I want to say up front that obviously this discussion with the Under Secretary General takes place before the summit. Obviously, this is a time where sensitive discussions, delicate negotiations are taking place with our actors. Really, this is the final crux in the making, which will bring us to an ambitious plan, to a way forward past to Istanbul and beyond that. So with that introduction in mind, I would really like to pass the floor and ask the first question to the Emergency Relief Coordinator. And I have to say, Stephen, I was in Chad about a month ago, and I was really in the deep field in Bogasola, and the colleagues there were very much inspired by the summit. But the key question that was coming and is really on many of our colleagues in the field, hearts and minds, is what would what impact or what change would the summit make for the people we're trying to help? What is really that could possibly improve the accountability to affected people, to put them in the center of our response and improve their quality of life and improve the situation where they find themselves in many situations for many years to go. So, Stephen, welcome to this webinar, and we're very much welcome to hear your reflections.
Well, good morning to everybody, and it's a genuine pleasure to be with you, particularly those of you who are out in the field, doing the work on the front line, saving lives, protecting civilians, and helping people to find their feet to be able to thrive in the future in safety and with hope. And I'm absolutely thrilled that we have this level of interest. It is, of course, a very significant moment for us to be thinking about how we continue to build on the very brilliant work that all of us are so heavily engaged with, and particularly, as I say, out in the field, but at the same time to take stock and to take a breath in order to look at how do we re-inspire ourselves and reaffirm our vision and our determination to deliver the very best of our humanity to all the people who need us most. And so, following the Secretary General's report, One Humanity Shared Responsibility, which was published at the end of last year and very much considered by everybody at the beginning of this year, which has been extremely well received by all constituencies, whether those like ourselves working in the field or indeed the donors, the broad commentators around the globe, identifying these 5 core responsibilities, so that when we say one humanity shared responsibility, we have a much better understanding of what that means concretely. And it's this sense of the summit being an opportunity to reset, to, if you like, restore the primacy of humanity, very much as a driver of our decision-making, and putting affected people at the heart and the center of that decision-making. So the question is, how will this make a difference to affected people? By clear analogy, that will make a difference to those of you in the field working, because the nature of the way decisions will get made will tilt towards really trying to be working through the eyes, the ears, the experience of people who are affected by crisis, and working as well to adjust to the new, sadly, the new normal, which is protracted crisis. That, of course, is most obvious when we look at the huge amount of humanitarian need coming out of the conflicts of the world. But actually, protracted crisis is relevant to natural disaster, maybe sudden onset, but some take a long time to move from being a crisis to being on a recovery path. And so the opportunity we have to put affected people right at the center. And I think, taking your example of Chad, it's very important. We can recognize, I think, with good, strong evidence that there are real needs, as we know, in Chad. There's been a long commitment to seeking to end the suffering of people who are either extremely short of nutrition, where health is under challenge, or the access to water or to education is extremely limited. And even though that is often endemic, year upon year, even seasonal, so you can't describe it as sudden onset, but it is nonetheless humanitarian, and at the same time has a strong developmental element to it. So one of the clear things about putting affected people at the center and the way that it will affect our working in the field is that if you are an affected person, you don't make the distinction between whether it is a humanitarian or a development worker who is coming to help you in Chad. All you know is that you need the assistance. You need the relief of your immediate needs that day, that hour, but at the same time, you want the chance to be able to build back or even start building a life which carries the hope that you're not going to be permanently in that situation. So the summit is a way of bringing together not only through this multi-stakeholder approach, not only political leaders, so that we establish the political will that enables and gives us a license to push forward the agenda for humanity set out in the Secretary General's report, but also for all of those either in the UN or those who are our partners for delivery, or indeed all those representing affected people and the academics and others, so that we have, through the multi-stakeholder representation, through these amazing consultations that took place and culminated in Geneva last October, and then informed the SG's report, to the point where we should be able to bring together a summit which is going to be both visionary and at the same time will have these concrete commitments for action, and that we will establish the political will and the commitment by all participants in delivering better on our humanity, the determination to take the agenda for humanity forward.
Steve, thank you. If I can move to one of the issues that has been forward at the summit, is really the question of localization. This has really come out through the consultation. It is very clearly reflected in the Secretary General's report and in the Agenda for Humanity. The term that has been used is as local as possible and as an international really as necessary. So if you can say a few words on what you think the summit will be able to deliver that will further empower local response and local actors. Basically, how will the summit change the way that international and local actors work together? We have all, I think, seen and appreciated the tremendous impact an operation has when we really have an equal partnership and we give the space and the floor to national actors who know best in terms of how to respond and what to do. So would appreciate to hear your views on localization and how it will be further enhanced at the outcome of the summit.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm sorry about that slight delay, but I have to unmute myself, otherwise that wouldn't be much of an answer. But I think this is a really important area, because localization, apart from the fact it's actually rather an awkward word, because it tries to sum up a huge amount of quite obvious, but at the same time often quite complex ideas. But localization, in the end, is very much an attempt to go with what we know to be the best practice and the mainstream of so many walks of life, and that is that if you can put the ownership of action closest to the people who are both delivering and also receiving the benefit of the action, then you're most likely to get it done topically, most efficiently, and with the immediacy that is necessary. And so, of course, we need the design, the technical capacity, the political will, the huge scale that the international community brings, be that through the UN primarily, but also through, for instance, international NGOs and the partnerships that we create, and the ability to procure the services and the support that's necessary for those of us operating in the emergency and the relief activities. And so when we talk about localization, we're talking about making sure that we bring the best of all that we can offer to the most local level. In jargon, that's often called comparative advantage, or where we can be most effective, most relevant. But in the reality, it means that, for instance, as we're doing today, working very closely with the really appalling concern we have about the effects of El Nino on people in Ethiopia tonight, means that it is right that we are working extremely closely with, at the first level, through the international community, the Ethiopian government, who are committed to trying to find a way of responding on behalf of the people they represent to this very dire emergency. But equally, working with that leadership and indeed the financial resources of the Ethiopian government itself that we partner with in order to make the necessary services available, whether that is food, water, shelter, medicines, logistics, making sure that there are seeds for next year's harvest, given that the onset of drought has meant that this season's harvest has been either severely affected or ruined, and indeed the seed corn for next year has gone with it. So these are all really important areas that we have to make sure we are working as locally as we possibly can be. And so that's where the Ethiopian administration had already got, as we know, the productive social safety net program, which has taken time to build up. And so this is a very good example that where you are able to work at the most local level, and I don't just mean government, but I also mean out at regional governments and municipalities, particularly as we now have an ever-increasing urban population around the world. So that is going to be an even more important aspect. But equally, with village communities, with the representatives of local communities and down to community and family level, finding all the people we can work with. So, for instance, in health, if you're trying to make sure that we are able to respond well to cholera outbreaks, some of the most important things is with the normative requirements that the international community is able to set, because it understands and knows from experience what you have to do to deal with that. But at the same time, it's finding very often women, because they tend to take the lead in communities and take the responsibility for families. Very often you need to find a particular local woman who's prepared to step up to the responsibility, give her the training to become a community health worker, that then it gives you the cascade opportunity to work at the most local level. That's localization, giving ownership of the solutions so that people are more agents in their own futures than us in the international community, with all the very best motives in the world, arriving and sometimes doing things to people rather than working with people. And I think it's trying at a very visionary level, but at the same time finding good concrete examples where we can better localize what we're doing. I can't give this response without also recognizing that there are genuine concerns in the way that this is meant to work, insofar as the more you take it down through all the levels and you then enable even a bottom-up approach to response to start really taking hold, we have to remember that at all times there is, mainly because the resources tend to be other people's money with a huge amount of ambition and hope that comes with it, that we can deliver to the intended targets of need. We need to have forms of accountability and transparency so that we can get the refunding. That is absolutely vital. But secondly, we need to hold on to the humanitarian principles. These are exceptionally fundamental to our ability to operate. Independence, neutrality, impartiality for humanity. And that is absolutely vital. So that often the more local you go, the more some of those can either be put into question or can be challenged. And we need to be very clear that there are certain fundamental principles which we have to secure and are uncompromising. So that's where we have a balance of judgment to make. It's where we have to really work hard through the summit to find good concrete ways of increasing localization, which is all about people and ownership, but at the same time not lose the absolutely vital principles and the ability to give people confidence and trust that when they are so generous in supporting the resources needed to deliver humanitarian aid, that they have the confidence that it'll be worth doing it a second time, because they can see through the evidence that it reached its intended target the first time.
Stephen, loud and clear. We heard you talking about working with people rather than for people, really putting the local actors to the front, but also the importance of the principles that we all rally and adopt in the center of our response. If I can move to another question, we've all seen and read the high-level panel report which came out on humanitarian financing. The report is titled "Too Important to Fail," and really this is one of the issues with the World Humanitarian Summit that has attracted and captured the attention of the humanitarian community, in particular related to the grand bargain. I'm very much aware that actually as we speak, there are discussions that are taking place with a number of actors from multiple fronts on the grand bargain, and there is ongoing discussion, which means that perhaps it's a little bit too early to go into what the outcome, what would it look. It is not a done deal yet. It's in the making, and obviously I would not want to put you on the spot in a way that would derail any of these discussions. What would be interesting and helpful as much as you can, if you can explain a little bit about the potential of the grand bargain and how it can really strengthen humanitarian assistance and protection. What do you see as the most important part? Planning, less earmarking, simplifying reporting, other ways of trying to bring us together with issues that colleagues in the field have suffered for, or suffered maybe is not the right word, but have gone for a long time with, heavy reporting or different ways of trying to make things, to make us really move forward in the best possible way. So to the extent that you can, it would really be useful, helpful for our colleagues in the field to share at least some of the big lines in terms of what it can look like, while of course fully understanding that if we have this conversation after the summit, you'll be able to be obviously much more precise and more specific on what it can look like. So over to you.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, the grand bargain is it's a phrase which has emanated from the high-level panel on humanitarian financing, which has been extremely well put together and very well received. It was launched in Dubai earlier this year, co-chaired by the Vice President of the European Commission, as many of you will know, Kristalina Georgieva, and also by His Royal Highness Nazrin Shah of Perak in Malaysia. And it encompasses many ideas, but I think the best way of indicating where we're at so far is that when you talk about a phrase like the grand bargain, clearly grand means bold and bargain means something from two sides. So what it's looking at is in exchange for particularly donors, given that emergency relief, humanitarian aid, requires us to raise huge amounts of money every year from generous donors in order for us to deliver these humanitarian results that we are so focused and dedicated to achieving. But of course, the escalating needs has meant that despite that generosity, the gap has got wider and wider. It can be variously estimated, but we've got about $15 billion of a gap to fill. Now, in order to do that, given that so many of the escalating needs come out of man-made conflict and therefore man-made humanitarian need, there is, as one can well imagine, a strong sense of even exasperation that this is almost endless. And in order to try and get a much better focus, we're trying to get a greater predictability of the funding, because those of you in the field know how intensely worrying and, of course, frustrating it can be if the confidence of all the plans that you have put together so carefully, with courage and with the importance of making sure that we do no harm, that we are prepared to stay and deliver, that we operate in some of the most difficult places on the planet with people who are often desperate and therefore not in a position to help themselves. We need to be able to have much greater predictability. To do that, we of course must always be able to demonstrate that we are giving the very best possible value for that money, and that we're not in any sense either complacent or prepared to assume that somehow just by doing it, we're doing it the very best way. So we have to demonstrate on our side of the bargain a much greater ability to be more immediate, to be more transparent, to be able to work with, as I've described in my previous answer, in a much more collaborative ownership way with first responders at local and national level. That we need to use cash-based assistance in a much more strategic way rather than currently something of a more ad hoc approach, which isn't so structured, where we need to look very carefully at how, from the very off, as we do relief, that we are also building in as best we can those activities which are going to give an opportunity for building back better, for making sure that we give people the chance not just to survive, but also thrive, to pick up a phrase that comes out of the Secretary General's report of One Humanity Shared Responsibility. And so what's really key here, when we look at the opportunities for us to do our work even better, to give even greater confidence and trust of the donors, where we need them to move more from a necessary mindset, which with political accountabilities for using taxpayers' money, which have to be accountable through politicians, through parliaments, to demonstrate that they have spent that money well in the name of and on behalf of the people they represent, and through democratic accountabilities. They also want to know that it is reaching the very, not only the targets, that it's not getting lost in administrative costs and the efficiencies that come from that, but also that they have an ability to know that it is on the evidence, that it is really on the back of tremendous needs assessments which are done in a collective way. When we think about alternative and innovative forms of financing, it's going to be very important that people like the World Bank have confidence in this system as well. So they will want to see that those needs assessments are also covering more of a risk analysis, the way they would approach. So all this adds up to thinking about, if we're serious about changing the nature of our discussion between donors and us operators, then we need to think about how do we move from effectively a series of grant fundings to something which sounds more like financing, giving us greater predictability, greater confidence that the resources will be there for us to do our work, that we can be absolutely sure that we can prove that we've done it well, and that we can therefore effectively get much more of an investment behind humanity as an approach, rather than continually having to go back for a further grant, a further funding. So whilst none of this will be absolute, and this is all very much a moving position, and it's taking a lot of intricate and careful discussion, negotiations with many parties and actors, I'm very confident that the World Humanitarian Summit will be an opportunity for us to articulate and to propose to the international community for adoption by the member states, who are the primary agents of the resources that we need to be able to do our work, but also others that will lead us to multi-year funding and planning for us to be able to identify the collective results we want to achieve, that we will therefore be able to bring all the very best of our comparative advantages to every humanitarian situation, which will also then bring in the opportunities for people to recover quickly, to be able to thrive over time. And that's where the so-called breakdown of the humanitarian development divide, which has been a discussion for about 20 years, but which we're now determined to try and make something much more real, and particularly the way you will be able to feel the way that operates in the field, so that you're able to look at the future and to help build back hope as much as to give immediate relief, and that the parties all come together in order to make that happen. One of the phrases that I've been associated with, and I have to say it's now with some, I hope not misplaced pride, but many years ago I invented the phrase in a previous life where I said, on the evidence, if you get it right first time, every time, for girls and women, you get it right for development, full stop. Well, I'm absolutely clear after 10 months in this job, if you get it right for girls and women, you get it right for humanitarian action, full stop. So we need to recognize that, for instance, if you're breaking down the humanitarian development divide, a highly developmental thing, you can see it in the 2030 agenda, you can see it in the way all development activities are now moving. Designing your response that really focuses not just on affected people, but on girls and women first, you're absolutely most likely to hit the target of relieving people's suffering and giving them the chance to have hope, to start building lives that are going to have opportunity and to thrive, if you focus on designing your response around girls and women first. So there's a good example, and you can see that as a crossover to the aspects in the World Humanitarian Summit, which are also going to put a particular focus on gender equality, and on the opportunities that we need to make sure are available to every human being on the planet, not just to some of them.
Thanks, Stephen. We're looking actually forward to seeing the results of it, and most importantly, as it translates to operations, the importance of designing the response, investing behind humanity. You talked about bringing the World Bank. It's really a frustration that many of us have had for several decades on how to bring this humanitarian relief to development. It's 34 minutes past the hour. We have already received some questions that came from the field. I'm actually going to take the first one, and I want to encourage colleagues as they are following this conversation for the next 25 minutes or so to please go ahead and send your questions, which I will be taking as we move forward. One of the questions that has really come forward is related to the protection challenges that colleagues are facing at the field level, and this is something we have seen a lot of the Transformative Agenda support missions that we have undertaken. Obviously, everybody understands the complexity of protection, in particular in today's world, but it's also clear that there is a need for more efforts that need to be made to support the humanitarian field leaders with implementing the IC statement on the centrality of protection, the senior leadership of protection that needs to take place at the field level. So in your view, what are some of the ways that the summit can deliver on strengthening the implementation of this centrality of protection by humanitarian field leaders, of course, with the objective of trying to see how to best benefit the protection of women and children. And you already alluded in your question, of course, in your previous answer, some of the women and girls first response. So excellent if you can give us your views on protection to one of the questions we just got from the field.
Well, thank you. And I think that it's worth restating that the summit is intended to carry with it a strong reaffirmation and enhancement of what is already a massive ambition, a visionary ambition, which has been articulated not least in the IASC statement on the centrality of protection. There is, of course, an absolute need to recognize that it is the right of every person in the world to have their rights and dignity protected, and particularly in conflict. And we can see around us today the massive abuse and non-compliance with that ambition and with that clear requirement for the dignity of all our fellow citizens around the planet. So anything we can do to make more progress on our long-standing commitment, whether it is by placing affected people much more at the center of our decision making, whether it is to make sure that they are absolutely at the center of our thinking, but also their protection is at the center of our humanitarian response, has to be an important thing. So the recognition, the reaffirmation, the insistence on compliance with international humanitarian law, with human rights law, with refugee law, with things which member states and everybody else have signed up to. So it's not saying that we have to invent something new. This is to get a very clear commitment that these are laws not only that exist, but ones which we expect compliance with and accountability and transparency. So part of focusing on the collective outcomes, which is something which is very central to the summit, very well set out in the Secretary General's report, which is strongly informing. And remember, this itself was strongly informed by that consultation that you referred to at the outset of this webinar, which involved over 23,000 people from 152 countries. So very much coming from the community of the multi-stakeholders who are affected by this summit. So yes, that includes, of course, member states, very key in the architecture, but also affected people, you, those in the field, delivering humanitarian results and actions, and also to all those who are part of, if you like, the system which tries to make it happen in increasingly the most efficient way possible. So we will have a much clearer focus through the summit, through the commitments that can be made in something called the Commitments for Action, coming out of the leaders segment of the summit, where leaders come with their particular commitments that they wish to make and offer into the overall humanitarian approach that we take, by the leaders roundtables, which are a series of roundtables on subjects which, if you look on the World Humanitarian Summit's website, and I encourage you all to take a look at that and to think about the opportunities and to make sure you make any representations you think are important to those who will be coming to the summit. And indeed, you should be doing everything you can from your respective countries and memberships to strongly urge your leaders to attend the summit. It's very important we have that huge political will in the room, because that's what will give us the authority to take forward the agenda for humanity. And so it's that strategic engagement on protection which is going to matter, with concrete commitments as to not just putting women and girls up front and first, but articulating, reaffirming, in so many cases, what has already been agreed, but is so often, sadly, honored in the breach, and where, in particular, as we know in protection, the problems of conflict means that so often people choose to overlook, either deliberately or unwittingly, the massive responsibilities that come with deliberately making sure you do protection. But it's also way beyond conflict as well. We know many settings around the world where we have girls, women, boys, men subject to very serious protection challenges, whether it is sexual violence, whether it is abuse, whether it is child soldiers, whether it is modern forms of slavery. So we have to really focus very strongly on what we mean by investing behind the protection, making sure the guidance is strong, and we can see how important it has been for the international actors to be critically engaged, and for you in the field to be critically engaged. We only have to think of the circumstances in, say, South Sudan today, how through the UN mission, which is there for its particular mandate, its particular purpose, but because it's there and was able to open its gates, the protection it has afforded to tens of thousands of people who might otherwise have either been killed or in some way suffered, have been afforded the protection that would not otherwise have been available to them. So there's a very good example of ensuring that we understand that whatever the current mandates, that we have to have this enabling environment that all those who are able to give protection and to encourage protection are given the permissive environment in which that can be delivered, and the reality of protection can become the reality for the people on the ground.
Thanks, Steve. Indeed, that reality of protection and the field leadership on really at the senior level to make it happen and to advocate is really crucial. Colleagues listening to this webinar, we have about 15 minutes left. As I will be asking my next questions, your questions that are coming through the Q&A, you will also see in a minute a closing poll that would appear where we also want to hear your views on this discussion. Stephen, one of the questions we got from the field is really on a delicate issue. The Secretary General report mentions the need to move past mandates and really work towards a status-based operations, to look really at what is at the heart of the matter of the issue that needs to be addressed, and for all of us, humanitarian actors, UN, NGOs, donors, to really put our effort into see how to address this issue, not necessarily driven through the mandate prism. Can you tell us a little bit, what does this mean, and how would it be implemented at the field level? This is one of the questions we got from our colleagues at the field.
It's a very good question. Thank you very much indeed. And I think that those of us who are in the UN tend to be very focused on the word mandate for all the reasons we fully understand, and indeed are totally proper and correct, because I operate under a mandate, everybody in the UN operates under a mandate. And it's vital that we are respectful of that and recognize that's what gives us our authority to act. And it's true, of course, of all our partners, whether it's in the UN funds, partners and agencies, whether it's in others we work with as implementing partners. Everybody has their mandates. Of course, the way to think about this, and what the Secretary General's report was very clear in setting out, is that mandates are there as the authorizing opportunity for us to do the very important and good work, good public work that we're all engaged in. But actually, when you think about what, particularly those of you in the field, are delivering, this is to do what you do best, i.e., getting the comparative advantage, what you are best at delivering, because if you bring all that together from everybody's comparative advantages, we can only be delivering better and the best. And that's where you couple this with the idea of the collective results that I've talked about earlier. So I'm conscious that a phrase like comparative advantage sounds as though suddenly we've all got to go to business school, which is absolutely the opposite of what I mean. But it does mean that we have to be focused on the fact that some of us are very good at certain things and others are good at the other things. And rather than, as it were, very focused upon each of our organizations trying to deliver all, we should very much want to work even better than we do already across and work with people to deliver collective results. This is very easy to identify when you look at how do you garner the evidence, how do you make sure that we have these big needs assessments that are looking across the piece, across the need, and looking at it not just for immediate relief, but looking at how do we take it forward on a timeline, particularly as we look at breaking down the humanitarian development divide. So I think that there's a real recognition that the time is right, not, as it were, to undo or indeed try and tear up the mandates, far from it. It's to use the strength of the fact that we have these mandates to then, with confidence, use our comparative advantages to come together in a more collaborative, more open-minded way, that we should all do that which we are best at, but not worry about having to do everything, because there will be others who might be better at doing certain aspects of activities. So yes, it could have an effect upon some of the activities in the field, so that you have this greater degree of complementariness. This also, and I'm not just talking about, as it were, a horizontal architecture across the UN family, I'm also talking, going all the way back to our first question during this webinar, to the way we work, if you like, vertically into the local communities with local actors, because they, as you know, have comparative advantages. One of the interesting sessions, a special session so-called, that we're going to have at the World Humanitarian Summit is going to be for the faith-based organizations. It's not because they or anybody else claims any kind of special reason for what they do is better than what anybody else does, but we do recognize that very often faith-based organizations, they will be there, they will be first responders, they will be extraordinarily close to their particular communities, and they will be there long after the immediate response, the relief, humanitarian emergency response have gone, going forward over time. And so there are certain comparative advantages, which is really important that we look at how they are able to bring even better than they do today. So those are the issues that I think will give us a better way of being able to work collaboratively, together, collectively, with collective results. And so the phrase that you've picked up on in this important question is very much an opportunity and not a threat. And I think it's very important to see that the summit is intending to build on the back of the confidence we have because we have these mandates, and that therefore we can work even with greater authority and greater expertise across with others to deliver the very best of our humanity under our shared responsibility.
Thanks, Stephen. And indeed, I would say an opportunity to use logic and common sense in some of the situations on what is really most appropriate or needed for the people. I want to remind colleagues that the closing poll is open, and as I move into the couple of last questions, Stephen, we got a question from the field, which is really asking the extent to which southern or local voices do actually shape the World Humanitarian Summit agenda, and in particular, to what extent they are part of the solution that is being proposed. The caller is saying, how can we walk the talk, move away from really more high-level or empty promises, and more specifically, to move to a new paradigm that ceds power and resources to local actors. So it's really the question of localization that came from the field.
Thank you very much indeed, and a very important question. It is clear the ambition for the summit is in its title, the World Humanitarian Summit. This is not intended, and I can tell you from the way we are gathering the commitments of world leaders, heads of state, heads of government to come, people representing their countries at very senior level, the leaders of NGOs, leaders of INGOs, that we are getting representation from across the planet. So the Global South is strongly going to be represented at the summit in all the constituencies of the multi-stakeholders. We seek and wish to encourage more and to make sure that there is a proper balance. I don't want, and I know that this is shared by everybody engaged with this summit preparation process, we don't want this to be either in reality or even perceived to be another meeting of, if you like, the donor club. It isn't that. It's very much intended, and you can see from the very nature of the 5 core responsibilities set out in the SG's report, in the way that and you can see this from the website, in the way that there's a leaders segment, there are the leaders round tables, there are the special sessions, there are the side events, and as you go through those, you can see the enormous range and opportunity that there is for people from every perspective, from every corner of the globe to have their voice and to have their say. Of course, the output of the summit will depend on what is committed to, what is said, and what is the process we can take forward from Istanbul with the political will that we generate there to ensure that the SG's vision for the agenda for humanity, which is in the report, it's in those chapters 4 and 5 at the back. If you haven't had a chance to read them, I do urge you all at field level to read them. I hope you will find them inspiring. They are certainly comprehensive. That does show you how the totality of the world community representing the world's citizenry can get behind the agenda of humanity, however they're represented, global south, global north, west, east, in voluntary communities can all get behind an agenda which is going to be better representative and able to deliver on our humanity for the people, well over 1 billion, maybe 2 billion, who need us most, in all the context of either suffering or vulnerability, and why we all work so hard in the humanitarian community, both in the formalized institutional and international mechanisms, but also in all the voluntary societies, charities, NGOs, INGOs, even through academia, and all those who are deeply interested are all going to have the chance to be represented, and indeed I can assure you are certainly on all the registrations and attendance lists going to be represented. So I think that your concern, I can give you the necessary assurance that the Global South will be strongly represented. The commitments to action that come out of the summit will determine how that translates into reality of the Global South having a strong and equal a role in the future that we would wish them to have, so that my answer would less be now talking about them, but then moving it to being us. And that would be one of the great successes and outputs from the summit, if that would be a genuine way of reflecting what has taken place.
Thank you. That's really that equal partnership and that working hand in hand to achieve the objective forward. I'd like to move to a next question, and the caller has sent a question saying that the summit really contains a number of very ambitious initiatives. There are proposals such as reducing to half the number of displaced people by 2030. There is talk about gender equality, about education, about emergencies, a number of initiatives that are all very exciting, ambitious. Which one would you say, in your view, most excited about? And which one do you think is the one that really practically can make the biggest difference to the people that are affected about the crisis, to the people we're all working towards trying to help?
Well, I'm probably not going to give you the answer you want, and that is I'm not going to give you a choice or a prioritization, because let me be clear, the enormous amount of work built upon the consultations that took place and the incredibly well-received tenor of the comments from the issuance of the Secretary General's report, which identified the 5 core responsibilities, which is how we, in a shared responsibility way, can deliver our one humanity across the globe. That is already the priority. You know, we have had to make all sorts of hard, very intellectual at times, but based upon practical experience, huge expertise, decades of understanding and work, we have already made a very clear choice of priorities, and they've ended up being those 5 core responsibilities, very much supported, therefore, by the opportunity that the summit gives for the 7
I'm sorry, I think we have a technical problem. We seem to have lost the voice connection. We're trying to reconnect. I want to ask our colleagues' patience. We're trying to sort out the voice technical problem. I'm not sure if colleagues can hear me. We have a technical problem on this end. Colleagues, we're resuming for the final couple of minutes, so we'll just give the opportunity to the Emergency Relief Coordinator to give us, I would say, to complete his answer, to give the final thoughts before we bring this webinar to a conclusion.
Well, I was in the middle. I don't know how much people were able to hear, but I was asked the question, what are the priorities, or what is my priority to coming out of the summit? And I was confessing that I wasn't going to be able to give the answer that perhaps you were hoping, i.e. to give my priority, because the Secretary General's report, which articulates the 5 core responsibilities, is already the culmination of a prioritization process of what we mean by being able to deliver our shared responsibility to gain this one humanity across the globe to all people who need us. And so that's why those 5 core responsibilities need to be delivered together. They're articulated very well in the Agenda for Humanity, which is set out in the final chapters of that SG report. It's that Agenda for Humanity which we're very much hoping the world leaders, as well as all those through the multi-stakeholders in the summit, will be able to come and to say, look, we really think this Agenda for Humanity does provide us with the vision, with the template, with the determination to go forward and to take the Agenda for Humanity forward. And if we do that, those 5 core responsibilities have the capacity, therefore, to be delivered. So yes, that would include very concrete things like trying to get the question of the number of displaced people down by a half by a particular date, by making sure, setting ourselves a big ambitious target, we are making the world's activities come to bear upon it, so we have something really concrete to aim for. It's worked before when we've looked for the collective will of the world, particularly when we were looking to through the MDGs, which we secured a high level of success by putting ambitious targets in place. Now that's been enhanced and repeated through the SDGs and the 2030 agenda. So there's no reason why we shouldn't be equally ambitious. The same is true about putting girls and women at the front and center of everything we do, because we know on the evidence that is what works for hope, it's what works for survival, it's what will give the best opportunity for people of all generations in all places to thrive. And they will also be the best agents to help us secure peace and peaceful environments, because of the need to bring women and girls much more into the mediation and resolution of conflict issues. Equally, education in emergencies. We absolutely, as was mentioned in the question, we need to focus on making sure that we do not leave any cohort of children behind, because in an emergency, the first thing that shuts is the school, and we need to make sure that children do get a continuing education in emergencies. Children, as we see from our television screens in the world's suffering areas, every day are amazingly resilient, and so we need to respond to that resilience by making sure they continue their education, even in the most dire of circumstances. So I'm afraid the answer to you is not the one that's convenient, but all the things we have set out are the priorities, and we need to deliver on them all. And the World Humanitarian Summit is our opportunity to come together, all the actors, all the interests, and above all the hope to deliver on a vision which can set us forth for decades to come. And it will require all of us to be as determined and as unselfish and as critically vital to the future of humanitarian needs, so that we can deliver better on the one thing which is the ultimate international public good we're all engaged with, which is delivering on our humanity to those who need us most, to our fellow human beings.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, I'm afraid this brings to a closure this webinar discussion. I would really like to warmly thank Under Secretary General, Mr. Stephen O'Brien, Emergency Relief Coordinator, for spending the last hour with us, sharing his thoughts, his reflections on the very important World Humanitarian Summit that is taking place actually in 60 days from today in Istanbul. We're all looking forward to an ambitious agenda, an ambitious plan, and most importantly, having these commitments made by all of us commitment that will bring forward the humanitarian work we're all doing for the sake of the people we are trying to do, to really make a difference, to really bring an impact to the affected people in a way that improves their lives to the better way possible. So I want to thank all of you who have joined us. I really want to thank the strong participation. We have had 57 countries, colleagues from 57 countries online. I want to repeat that this webinar is recorded. It will be available online, and really would like to wish you all a good day, and thank you for listening to us during this discussion. That brings a closure to this webinar. Goodbye to everybody.